Tonight's the night. And it's gonna happen again. What is up, guys, and welcome to my review of Dexter Original Sin. You guys don't realize this, but this is actually the third time I've recorded this review. I've been battling the cold from hell for the last week, and so I initially recorded this. My voice sounded awful. I was so congested, didn't want to put that product out. Recorded it again yesterday, over 45-minute video, and then went into the editing booth and realized that my eye had become inflamed in the middle of the recording. And so now here I am for the third day in a row talking about Dexter Original Sin. So if nothing else, my thoughts are going to be organized as fuck on this one. So for those that might just be following my channel now and have not seen all of my previous coverage, I have covered the hell out of Dexter. I've reviewed every single individual season. I did week-by-week, episode-by-episode reviews when Dexter New Blood was airing. I did a number of rankings after that show finished where I did the seasons, of course. I ranked Dexter's antagonists. And now we have Dexter Original Sin, and in a few months, Dexter Resurrection, which I also plan to do a review once that season is over with, and most likely revisit all of my rankings again. So if you're a Dexter fan, you have found the right place. Hit that subscribe button and click this playlist up here if you want to check out all of that past coverage. And to give some context about my expectations for this show, back when they announced this idea, maybe two and a half years ago, where they said that they're going to have a Dexter prequel series, they're going to do a Trinity Killer prequel series, which supposedly is actually going to come to fruition as well, and they were going to do a Harrison spinoff, like a follow-up to Dexter New Blood, which presumably has now been morphed into Dexter Resurrection. And for as cautiously optimistic as I'm trying to remain about Dexter Resurrection, all I can say is I think I speak for all of us in saying thank God we didn't just stick with a Harrison spinoff, because none of us want that shit. But with Dexter Original Sin specifically, that was the idea that as soon as I read it, I just immediately groaned and rolled my eyes and just saw cash grab and went, come on, like, you guys shot yourself in the foot with the way that you ended Dexter New Blood. It ended up being the highest rated, highest watched show that Showtime ever put out in its massive long history. And you guys said, oh fuck, how do we continue to milk this property now that we've killed off the character? Let's do a prequel. I just hated the idea. There was nothing about it at all that gave me hope that this is going to be an actual story or something that's going to add some value to the Dexter property aside from just something else for us to watch and for them to milk us for money. And with that said, what I will say is that a good bit of what I feared this series was going to turn out to be actually came to fruition. But all the same, I hate how much I still enjoyed it, and I'll get into all the reasons why. Overall, by the end of the show, I was a fan. I'm not one of those people that thinks that this is one of the top-tier Dexter seasons or anything like that, but overall, I did enjoy it. So the way I'm going to do this review, a little more freeform than what I normally do, but I'm going to spend a good chunk of time just giving you my general thoughts in a spoiler-free fashion in case you're wondering why or if you should check out this show and don't want to know specific details. And then I'll get into all of the specific characters and storylines and, you know, speculation on the future, stuff like that in the spoiler segment. So what I will say to kind of sum up my thoughts on Dexter Original Sin is that it was a mid-tier, decent Dexter story with widely varying quality of recasts, all significantly elevated by the fact that they are so good at recapturing the vibe, the energy, and the charm of the early Dexter seasons. The nostalgia factor of making this feel like classic Dexter is the biggest shining star of this series. And I think that that is something that is going to allow most people, myself included, to overlook a lot of the major glaring flaws of this season because it just feels so damn good to be back. And that's kind of the thing that pisses me off, because normally I would be so against that type of cynical approach to something like this. We don't really have a story to tell. We don't really have anything that we can add to the Dexter lore that's really worth telling. So what can we do? Well, they hate a lot of the newer shit, so let's just go back to the older shit and try to recreate that. On paper, that pisses me off. But in practice, I'm like, God damn, kind of like this. Something about getting back to that Miami charm and the vibrance of the original seasons and having the quirky dark humor be a lot more present like it was in the first couple of seasons, predominantly season one, having a lot of the original characters back that eventually, left the show for various fates. So much of that worked, and I hate that it worked, but damn it, it worked. Even just getting back to simpler times of just having Dexter slowly pursue one big bad while just doing these freak of the week little investigations where he picks up a scent of some little side boss character and goes and pursues them and investigates and eventually puts them on the table, all the while slowly throughout the season picking up little details about who's eventually going to be the big killer of the entire season. Like, that's what was so great about the early seasons, when it was simplistic, when it was back to basics, and they captured that so damn well with Dexter Original Sin. Now, with all that said, I don't think that anything in this show ever really reaches the heights of those classic seasons of Dexter. I don't think the characters are as well performed, as well written. I don't think that the overall big bad of the season is as well executed or is as captivating as characters like the Ice Truck Killer or the Trinity Killer. But just getting back to the feel of those first couple of seasons after just totally losing the mark in the last few seasons of the original show and absolutely missing the mark with what the energy of the show should be with New Blood, that was the shining star of this season that allowed me to enjoy it much more than I ever thought I would be able to, especially after that first episode, man. That first episode was rough. Like, I was still cautiously optimistic. I didn't hate it, but when the first episode is predominantly just giving us an extended version of a flashback that we already saw, I feared that was going to be the whole season. We're just going to go step by step through a bunch of flashbacks from the first two seasons, and we're just going to get the 45-minute version of them, and I would have hated that. Luckily, we quickly got away from that after episode one, but yeah, story-wise here, I think they did a decent job. I really enjoyed a lot of the focus on younger Dexter as far as his, fresh out of college and trying to join the workforce and figuring things out and how to be quietly acclimated into a workforce. All the stuff with his first girlfriend I thought was hilarious. I enjoyed his relationship with Deb. Had some significant issues with Deb herself, but his brother-sister relationship early on with Deb, I enjoyed that. The Harry and Laura Moser flashbacks, I'm going to dive a lot more into that in the spoiler section, but for something that I was very skeptical about when they first started diving into it, by the end of it, I think it served a really nice purpose. And overall, I think it sets itself up in a situation where presumably we're going to get more seasons of this. I don't think they were confident in that, and I'll get into reasons why, but I think the success of this is going to merit having a few more seasons, and they've set themselves up in a nice spot to deliver some classic Dexter storylines now that we've caught our footing, we've got the fans on board, and the cast is more acclimated. So I'm optimistic for the future of this little prequel series, however many seasons that it runs. The main negatives with it, though, is that, I think that it has a lot of the prequel problems, which is something that I tend to be really hard on. I'm not a big fan of prequels, especially in the horror genre, and Dexter is very horror adjacent. They tend to focus on answering questions that I was never asking, give me answers that I don't like, and even at its worst form, they tend to just be a big Easter egg hunt. It's just, hey, this is how he got this. This is how he got the boat and how he named the boat. And this is why he started using plastic. And I'm like, do I need a show to tell me those answers? Fuck no. So I think it does have some of that prequel-itis issue where it focuses too much on insignificant details as if they're really significant and putting a lot of Easter eggs in there that are pretty heavy-handed. I also think that the show approaches creating some continuity errors. I do think that it's valid to say that they're rubbing the shoulders on doing some retcons that I'm not super comfortable with. And I found it to be strange that they took the approach with this prequel series that it is not a good onboard at all for new Dexter fans, which was just bizarre to me because the show is, years, a decade plus old at this point. And we're trying, obviously, to get new fans into Dexter before we get to Dexter Resurrection, have them go back and watch the older seasons and stuff. And so Dexter Original Sin, or any prequel for that matter, tends to be something where, you're trying to appeal to the fans of the original property and have some things in there that are nice little wink and nod moments to those fans, but also tell a story that can survive on its own so that you get some potential new fans that now go, oh, cool, now I want to watch the original, and now I want to watch season 1 and go through this whole 9-season crazy-ass ride. And I don't think Dexter Original Sin works at all if you're not an established Dexter fan. I think most of the charm of the show goes completely over your head. All the Easter eggs and the little details that they're focusing most of their energy on mean nothing to you. And one character introduction in particular, which I'll dive into a lot in the spoiler section, really it destroys any potential experience that you're going to have with one of the original seasons, because they're giving away answers that we took episodes building up to reveals for. So I thought that was also very strange. When you have something like this, it seems like the perfect time to onboard some new fans, and they just didn't bother with that at all. And I just mentioned this, but I do also feel like they tried to do too much in this first season. It felt like they weren't confident at all that we were going to go past one season of Dexter Original Sin, because there's like 4 or 5 significant things all going on at once. You have young Dexter graduating from college, acclimating into the Miami Metro. You have the main villain storyline. You have a side villain storyline that Harry and eventually LaGuerta are going on an investigation for. You have the Harry and Laura Moser backstory. You have this other character that works its way into that side killer storyline that becomes a big focus, as well as, Deb and where she's eventually going to go. Like, there's just too much for one season, which leads a lot of these storylines to feel a little scattershot and incredibly rushed, especially ones that I'd be more interested in seeing kind of breathe a little bit more. It just felt like they're trying to do everything in case the 10th episode of this series was the last that we ever see of this cast. Now, hopefully it gets better with season 2, season 3, however many they plan on doing. Hopefully now they're a little confident and they can let shit breathe a little bit more. But for this first season, I do think they tried to do too much, and it made everything fit together a little clunky for me. But overall, guys, before I get into my spoiler section, if you are a classic Dexter fan, even if you're somebody who is just completely burned by the last couple of seasons or even the last 4 or 5 seasons, I would say give this a shot. You will find out within the first 3 or 4 episodes whether you're on board for this or not. But from what I'm seeing online, most fans that are like clinging to the glory days have really enjoyed, for the most part, what they delivered here. So I encourage you to at least give it a shot. Now let's dive into spoilers. Let's first talk about all of the different characters here, and we'll start with Dexter himself and Patrick Gibson. Now, I think that it's important to acknowledge that nobody was going to fill Michael C. Hall's shoes. Absolutely nobody. Aside from getting in the fucking DeLorean and picking up Michael C. Hall in the past and bringing him here to play younger Dexter, there was never going to be an actor who was going to 100% fit what Michael C. Hall brought to this character. But with that said, I think Patrick Gibson does as good of a job as you can expect somebody who's not named Michael C. Hall to do. I think that he did a really good job at somewhat making the character his own, leaning a lot more into the young naivety and a little bit more of the quirky awkwardness of young Dexter, which does make sense. He hasn't been out in the workforce, out into adulthood as long as when we meet him in season 1, where he's able to kind of hide in plain sight a little bit better. So I like that he's, ramped up that side of the character a bit. He's really good at capturing a few of the Michael C. Hall mannerisms, not in a way that feels like it's annoying or, too on the nose. And I also think that he brings a little bit of humanity in there that I like to see from the character of Dexter, especially when he's saving children and things like that. Like, he's a character we can root for, even though he's doing terrible things. That's the weird thing about characters like Dexter. It's like we still like him because of those moments of humanity in there. The one aspect of his performance that I will say that was lacking for me is that I don't think he was that great at capturing the darkness of Dexter. I don't think, maybe they just didn't give him enough opportunities in this first season story to do that, and maybe I'll eat those words later on. But in this first season, I didn't get as many of those classic moments of the Michael C. Hall shift, where, he'll change his face, he'll drop his cheekbones, he'll have that look in his eye, and you just see this shadow behind his face. And he was always so good about bringing that out so suddenly, so subtly, in really good moments where it made sense to. And I just never really got that from him. Dexter, at the end of the day, is a psychotic murderer. He's a monster. and he just has this really great mask covering that most of the time. I don't feel like we got to see that mask slip so much with Patrick Gibson's performance, but we'll see what happens in the future. Overall, I think he did a really good job. Christian Slater was the other big one for me. And man, I have such complicated feelings about Christian Slater's Harry Morgan. On one side, I'm a big Christian Slater fan, so I'm inclined to like him in anything that he's in that he's good in. And I do think as a performance, he gives a really good performance as Harry Morgan. However, I don't think his version of Harry Morgan meshes at all with what we have come to know Harry Morgan as in the James Remar performance. James Remar is somebody who's a lot more warm, a lot more nurturing, a lot more fatherly in the flashback segments, as well as, Ghost Harry throughout the first 8 seasons. And I don't feel like Christian Slater captured that at all. And I don't know if that was his own choice. I don't know if that's the way the character was written. Like they were trying to make younger version of him, like so much more hard-edged than what we knew. But the way the flashbacks line up, like we're getting that version of James Remar at an even younger age than what Christian Slater is, because we're seeing flashbacks of him with Dexter as a child, as a teenager, and all of that. So if this was like a complete reboot, and we're starting from scratch, I'd be like, hell yes, I love what he's doing. This is a really cool take on the character. Go, full steam ahead. But this is supposed to be the same character that is the James Remar version that we have seen for 8 years, and I don't think they have very much in common. So that is a significant issue that you have to bring up there. I still liked it. It wasn't like a really glaring thing that just bothered me every single episode just because I like Christian Slater, probably. But for those of you that aren't inherently a Christian Slater fan, I'm curious if that really bugged you, because it just felt like he was more of a hard ass, more of a hard-edged guy. And, he has his fatherly moments, but it's just not as warm as James Remar. So very, very complicated feelings on what they eventually did with his character. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to storylines too. You have Patrick Dempsey's captain here, who eventually is revealed to be the big bad. Another actor that I love ever since, I was a kid watching movies of him from the 80s. I've always been a big Patrick Dempsey fan. I've loved seeing him kind of get a little resurgence here and there. And, here recently, especially with things like Thanksgiving and now this. So I really like what he did. I think he gave a great performance. His character, I didn't really get a whole lot out of. I thought it was kind of obvious fairly early on, not right away, but about 4 episodes in or so, that he was going to be revealed as the kidnapper killer, mostly just because in a prequel, you run into this problem as well, where you look around Miami Metro and you're like, well, I don't think it's Sarah Michelle Gellar, and everybody else here is alive in season 1, so I wonder who the killer is going to end up being. And now just kind of running through some of the smaller characters, some of the Miami Metro side characters. I thought Christina Milian did a great job as LaGuerta. She was the one person here that didn't feel like an impersonation to me. It felt like she really dove in and embodied what that character was about without just feeling like a cosplay performance. So I really hope we get to see more of her in season 2. LaGuerta is a very complicated love-hate type character, and I want to see a little bit more depth to her younger years before she turns into this, political manipulative bitch. So really liked what she brought to it. I thought Sarah Michelle Gellar was completely wasted. Absolute waste. And I don't know if they have plans for her in the future to do more with her character and they were just holding back in this season, or, she just did it as a favor or what. You could have cut her character out of this show completely. Nothing would be lost. And that's a shame. Like, it just felt like almost stunt casting to get some of us genre fans on board so that they can put, with Sarah Michelle Gellar in the opening credits. But her character did nothing. So massive disappointment there. Batista, he doesn't really do enough to frustrate me, but he was the one that most felt like Comic-Con cosplay to me. Like, just comically accurate to how Batista looked in season 1, season 2, which it was just weird to me. I didn't think that he really captured Batista's warmness. I didn't think that he captured what we like about Batista very well, nor did he really have the opportunity to, so I don't completely blame the actor. But just the fact that I guess Batista wore the same outfit for like 25 years is comical to me. Masuka, fucking hated Masuka. And again, I don't blame the actor. I think when he's just doing regular interactions with Dexter or whatever, he was fine. But my God, they made that laugh bit the most obnoxious fucking recurring thing in this show where every single time they did it, I wanted to fucking cringe and throw my remote at the TV. And most of it was ADR. So it was like last minute, we need to have more Masuka laughs. Like there's a quota. So you'd have him talk with Dexter, and then the camera would cut to Dexter's face and you'd hear in the background. And I was just like, oh, you doesn't just fucking laugh every time for random reasons. Get your shit straight. So of all of the classic Miami Metro characters, I hated what they did with Masuka. Absolutely hated it. And I forgot to talk about Deb. You know, Deb, I was very mixed on Deb this entire season. And Deb's a complicated character because she is such a rough-edged character and is such a volatile character more times than not. But there was something about Jennifer Carpenter that always held this charm to her. There was always this, you know, sisterly, nurturing side to her, as well as her just being a really moral, good cop that always kind of grounded that. And because we're not at that stage of Deb's life yet, I felt like all of her worst qualities as a character were basically the entire character this time around. I think the actress does a pretty decent job at bringing her own thing to Deb while very much tapping into the Jennifer Carpenter charm. But I just don't really like her character for what they do with her story-wise. She's just this wild, you know, teenage girl who's bitchy and moody and just rebels against everything that she's told. And I know that they're trying to really capture the whole, she's desperately having daddy issues because he just doesn't pay attention to her. He's always focused on Dexter. And that's always been something that's a part of her character where she's trying to outshine Dexter somehow, even years, decades after her dad has passed away. But I just didn't think it landed right. Like there's a few scenes like where she comes home and she's alone and nobody's there with her and she just cries. Like there's good stuff there. But overall, most of it is just her going out and partying and being a bitch to people at school and being a bitch to her best friend and being a bitch to Dexter and her father and going off and fucking some dude who's 4 or 5 years older than her, who's got all the money in the world and his own apartment and a fucking yacht. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with what this guy's caught up into. And, you know, even just that, I rewatched the original series in New Blood here recently in preparation for this show and Resurrection more specifically. And it really dawned on me during this rewatch how every single season somehow devolves into just a main storyline of who Deb's fucking at the time. And so that whole thing is just like, oh, so she had shit taste in men all the way back to when she was a teenager. So yeah, like it's not the actress's fault. I think she does pretty good. And I'm sure we're going to get more with her in further seasons that'll make me warm to her a bit more. Just this first season, just didn't like what they did with her character. She's just an unlikable person. And now let's talk about some of the storylines. So the thing that I enjoyed the most was some of the darkly comedic elements of Dexter in his youth. You know, having some of the high school politics shit, even though he's graduated from college, and how he interacts with Deb, and more specifically, how he interacts with his first girlfriend. I thought that stuff was hilarious, where, you know, and you have moments like this all throughout the show, especially season 1, where he's trying to figure out how to keep this relationship with Rita, even though he has no idea, like, how to please a woman in a relationship. He's always, like, against the wall, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know what the right thing to say is. I don't fucking know. And I love that they kind of tapped into that even more here, where you got this girl who's Deb's friend, and, you know, she likes Dexter, I guess, just because he's kind of weird and mysterious. And she just decides that, you know, they're boyfriend and girlfriend. He just kind of goes along with it. It's like, whatever, I guess it's just a part of my cover. And again, just zero knowledge, zero game whatsoever on Dexter's part, but yet somehow his goofy, awkward ass continues to score. And it's just so fucking funny to me. When you got them out on their first double date and he's only ordering food for himself, doesn't even ask her what she wants, like doing all the red flag shit with the first date. And then 5 minutes later, she sucks his dick in the bathroom. And it's just like, hell yeah, that's fucking awesome. I'm sorry. That's hilarious. So, and even after she breaks up with him, he doesn't quite understand why. He doesn't really give a fuck. And then later on, he comes up to her to ask for Deb's whereabouts, and she parades this new guy in front of him and starts kissing. And he's just like, I don't know what to do with my hands. What is this supposed to mean? All that stuff I thought was pretty fucking funny. I also liked some of his awkwardness whenever he's first getting into the forensic stuff. Like there's a really great scene in like episode 3 or something like that, where they let him kind of view the first crime scene. and he gets like this wonder in his eyes, and he feels like such a badass because he's looking at it and he's like, oh, the killer did this and this blood trail did this, and I can figure this out, and he stabbed her over here, and then he's figuring out all these details, and you think they're setting it up where he's going to be like this prodigy, and everybody just looks at him like, yeah, no shit, kid, we all know that. Can you tell us anything that's not fucking obvious? Like, that was hilarious. So a lot of really good moments, getting back to that original dark humor, that quirkiness, that stuff that always worked well in the early seasons and was present later on, but just not as present. And I liked, for the most part, him going on the Freak of the Week hunts. You know, especially with some of the castings that we got. You got Jeff Daniel Phillips on one of them. We got Joey Pants on one of them. And the way that whole turned out with him getting creamed by a car. Like, again, getting back to some of that fun of the first couple seasons before things just got darker and darker and more intense, which was great. But getting back to that was the best part, especially with Dexter's storyline. The Harry and Laura Moser stuff. I rolled my eyes into the back of my fucking head when that first episode showed and we got a flashback sequence with them, because I was like, oh my God, are we going to spend all season developing this out as if we don't know where things are going to end? Like, what is going to be solved here? What are you going to tell us that we don't already know? And God help you if you retcon some bullshit and say, oh, it didn't actually happen that way. Fuck you. Do not dare do that. And I was pleasantly surprised by about halfway through the season how much I started to invest myself in that. And what I found to be the value in it, it doesn't really add anything to the story. It doesn't really add anything to our understanding of Dexter or of Harry or anything like that. But it gives us much more of an emotional connection to Laura's death, because all we ever had was these quick little flashbacks. You know, it was something that was a mystery that was revealed throughout the first season. And we've, gone back to that scene of him getting pulled out of the cargo container by Harry like 17 times in the first 8 seasons. But it really hammered home the tragedy of that character, because I don't think they nailed that in the flashbacks at first. She seemed like kind of a junkie mom, and Harry was just the best thing that could have happened to those kids. And it kind of flips that a little bit here, where there's much more of a good intention on her part, where she's just stuck between a rock and a hard place, and she has to keep doing this, otherwise she goes to jail and she loses her kids. So she's putting herself in harm's way for months and months and months for her kids. And then when they rip her out of her house and they put her in that cargo container, you're just like, fuck, like I knew this was coming, but God, this sucks. And I'm going to tell you, when we got to that scene where Harry pulls him out of the cargo container, the same scene that we've seen, flashbacks of 18 times, and they zoomed out and showed Brian just in the corner in the darkness, and then they showed her severed body pieces with her severed head right there in the front of it. That was a fucking grisly ass image. That was one of the most disturbing things that I've seen in this entire run of this show. Even though I knew it was coming, even though I know what happens to her, even though they show flashes of it really quickly in previous seasons, showing her head there with her son in the background was fucking wicked. So I ended up really liking what they did there. What they did with Harry in those flashbacks, though, I had some significant issues with. I think that, they tried really hard to try to add something to Harry's character here, and I just didn't feel like any of it was necessary. Like, it starts off the season with showing that he had this son that we've never heard about ever that drowned, as some kind of an extra reason why he's so fatherly towards Dexter. Didn't think that was necessary at all. It was never mentioned again past that first episode, so it was kind of a complete waste to me. I also don't like those jump the shark moments where it's like this major detail that definitely would have come up in conversation is just now coming up 9 years later. Then you get into the whole thing with him and Laura, and again, I thought his relationship with Laura, all that stuff was done really well, but I really did not like how cold they made Harry to Brian from the beginning. And like, you have him automatically have this fatherly quality towards Dexter from even the early days of him and Laura having this affair. And all of that is good. Like, it shows this pre-established thing of why he would take Dexter beyond just like, some kind of moral, I need to save this kid motivation. But the reason why he was always cold to Brian, I never understood. And they never really gave much of a reason for that. Like, he was just could not give a fuck about that kid. And again, it felt like it's because they were trying to give some kind of extra motivation to Brian Moser that didn't need to be there. Is his mother getting sawed up into pieces in front of him and him being stuck in a cargo container, sitting in her own blood, holding his crying brother for days on end? Is that not fucking enough? No, we got to make it where he was ignored by Harry and he's jealous because he loved Dexter but didn't love him. I thought that was so stupid. I thought that was so unnecessary. And I actually think with the way that the storyline goes this season, with them introducing Brian later on, and that being the killer that Harry and LaGuerta have been hunting, and now Harry has this regret and this ultimate confrontation with him in the finale, it would have held more weight if he had a relationship with Brian that was on par with his relationship with Dexter. But after the cargo container and the death of Laura, Brian was an older, more aware child, and he just went off the fucking rails and was unsavable, which was the premise that we were given, from the beginning. But I thought that was just weird, and it takes away from Harry's character. It makes me wonder what the fuck his deal was. Like, how could you love one kid and just ignore the other one? And it makes me dislike him on some level, and I don't want to do that. You're supposed to like Harry for what he tries to do in this noble way to save Dexter, even if it's misguided. And so if they had just had it where he was fatherly towards both of them, up until the point where she's killed, and Brian just knows because he's a little older and he's a little more aware that my mother is dead and I went through this and I am destroyed and shattered for the rest of my life because of you, because you made her do this and you did not protect her the way that you said that you would. That would have been great, compelling shit. But having it just be, oh, Harry always loved Dexter and now I'm mad about, I didn't like that at all. Now, since I brought it up, let's talk about Brian Moser a little bit. Now, I think this is one of the main things that I'm talking about when I say that they did too much in this season. I don't think Brian Moser was necessary in season 1. I don't even know if he's necessary in season 2 of Original Sin. I get wanting to put him in there somewhere and have it where, there was some kind of a overlap of their lives and stories at some point. That could be cool, but I just felt like it was too much. It didn't get enough focus if they were going to try to focus on it, and it's really approaching being a bit of a continuity error for me. So Brian started going on this killing spree, and he has this confrontation with Harry, and he's got Harry dead to rights, could have killed him right there. But Harry telling him, hey, I've saved Dexter, and if you love your brother, you know that you want to save him from being ended up like you got to leave. You have to leave him alone. You can't pursue this. And, he lets Harry live and writes "you're right" with blood or whatever on the door. That would have been enough. I still feel like it was too much, but that would have been enough for me. But having him show up yet again, having him creep on Dexter and Deb and Harry as they're dancing in the Cuban restaurant, that just makes it weird for me that, okay, so he just is a weird creeper in the shadows for 10 fucking years before he finally decides to put a doll in Dexter's freezer in season 1. It doesn't add up for me. Maybe they'll do something with him in the next season that'll justify that, possibly. I can only judge what I see now, but I didn't feel like that was necessary. So while I get the appeal of wanting to flesh out Brian Moser as a character, and I certainly am not opposed to finding out more about his younger years, it just felt like that was suddenly thrown in the last half of this season. And, you could have had it where the scene that he shows up in episode 3 or 4, and he asks Dexter if he could sit down in that Cuban restaurant. And, all the fans were like, is that Brian Moser? That was so weird and out of nowhere. If you just let us sit on that for this whole season, and then in season 2 at some point, Brian Moser is one of the main killers that they're investigating, and then they show who he looks like, and it's like, dude, that's the fucking guy from season 1. That could have been cool. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very complicated and mixed on Brian Moser. I think that they did a good job at recreating the character and having him, again, like Patrick Gibson, bringing a little bit of his own thing to it, but very much matching the performance of the actor from season 1. But I just don't know if that storyline was necessary. And the way that they handle his relationship with Harry, and Harry being so cold to him as a kid, I thought that was mishandled. So, I could take or leave the Brian stuff, and I'm worried that they're going to go too far with it. Now, one thing that I will say as speculation for the future that could win me back is one thing that I have a sneaking suspicion they might be setting up is that, we all know as Dexter fans that after Harry walked into one of Dexter's kill rooms, he was so overstricken with shock and grief and, horror with what he's created, that he overdosed on pills and he committed suicide. I have a suspicion that they're going to retcon that, and they're going to have Brian Moser be the one who kills Harry. And for as much as I always wince when it comes to major retcons and prequels, I'm here for that. Because while I don't necessarily think that it doesn't make sense that Harry would commit suicide after seeing what he's created and kind of being faced with the reality of it for the first time, I would prefer it if that was not the case. I would prefer it if somehow he has a second confrontation with Brian and he realizes it's going to be him or it's going to be Brian. He's not going to go away. He's not going to listen. And so Brian kills him with an overdose or does whatever, incapacitates him. And if they pull that off well, I could really be a fan of that. And to me, that would make it okay that we've done so much with Brian, and I can forgive the weirdness of, okay, so like he just chilled in the background until the time was right, I guess. That there's ways that they could make that make sense. One of which is he has to go to med school. They're going to fit in a fucking timeline for that because he's a doctor in season 1. But Brian Moser overall, I'm a little bit mixed on. I'm curious where you guys land on that one. Something else with Harry, and I'm sorry I'm kind of bouncing around. I figured it'd be a little more freeform. I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get more time of just Harry and Dexter together doing things. I thought that it was a little odd that as soon as he got a job at Miami Metro, Harry just completely took the leash off and focused on work and did his own thing and let Dexter go off and completely unsupervised for the most part. And he would, get on his ass every once in a while when Dexter would let something slip about a fuck up that he made on his latest kill. But for the most part, he was just like, all right, who'd you kill tonight? Oh, interesting. Okay. You want pizza for dinner? And I think I would have preferred it if at least part of the season, Harry had him like under his wing and had him with him. And he was a little more involved with Dexter's first kills. I don't know if that completely adds up for me. So him just kind of letting Dexter do his thing and him just going off in his own side story. I think that's part of the thing where I said that they tried to do too much in season 1, where if they weren't trying to set up the Brian stuff, I think that would have been the natural way to go this story, is having a Dexter and Harry season for the first time that's not in flashback form. Last couple of things that I'll say. So we'll circle back to talking about the kidnapper killer, who is Patrick Dempsey's character. Now, at first, I really liked this storyline because of how brutal it was. He's literally torturing and killing kids. That's pretty fucked up. That immediately gets me invested in like, okay, who's this sick fuck and how are we going to absolutely make him pay by the end of it? And it came to a point where I figured it was Patrick Dempsey. Then they eventually revealed it. And I was like, okay, I'm still cool with it, even though it was a little obvious, as long as you give him a really good motivation. And when we got to the episode where he kind of set up a scenario where he got his kids' clothes into this little cartel house so that they could do a raid, and then he kind of starts a shootout so they can kill all these cartel members. I thought to myself, ooh, that's actually really cool, because obviously he's doing this because he's like a psycho level cop. Like, I got to take out these cartel members, but the red tape of the justice system is not letting me do it. And so it's worth it to me to kill these other kids, to even kill my own kid or torture my own kid, to set up a situation where we can raid these cartel houses and I can set things up where I can just deliver my own brand of justice without all the fucking red tape getting in the way. Because that would set up a scenario where you have a big bad killer that has the same ideology as Dexter in a lot of ways. I have to be the bringer of justice because the justice system doesn't work as well as it should. And I thought that was going to be a really cool thing to have them come to a confrontation where they're kind of standing for the same thing. And they didn't go that way. For whatever fucking reason, they didn't go that way. They just meant, oh, I'm pissed off because my wife fucked some other guy and this is why I'm doing all this. I was like, really? That's the motivation? Wow, fucking lame. So I didn't love the last couple of episodes, how they rounded out his character, how they wrapped everything up. Still thought it was a great performance, but if that had been a better motivation, more akin to what I thought they were clearly setting up, I mean, the kidnapper, if that's what we're going to call him, I think he'd be in the top half of Dexter villains for sure. But with that motivation, it was just like, that's fucking lame. I'm not on board for that. No. You set up much better. Why didn't you go that route? The other thing, going back to kind of continuity errors, I think it's weird that we have literally the captain of Miami Metro that's revealed to be this killer that presumably they never find out what happened to him because Dexter killed him, dumped him. They just assume he fucking skipped town. And all they do to acknowledge it is they put his fucking face on the little whiteboard. And they're like, oh, it was him the whole time. Shit, that's weird. Anyway, you want coffee? And beyond that, I think it creates an issue where when you get to season 2, and you have the Bay Harbor Butcher reveals, and they're like, oh my God, it's law enforcement. And then an episode later, oh my God, it's somebody from this department. Who could ever suspect a thing? Apparently, a lot of you should have suspected it because you guys got fucking serial killers just breeding in this bitch. Worst police district ever. So yeah, I ended up very mixed on the Patrick Dempsey kidnapper character. You know, I think they could have done something else and just had Captain Matthews be in there. Another character that was weirdly absent here, somebody who was definitely there for that time of, you know, Harry being on the force and everything like that. So I guess they'll probably introduce him in season 2, but another kind of continuity error there. Like, we know for a fact he was there working with Harry way back when Dexter did his first couple of kills. Anyway, getting on to some smaller things, I will say Easter egg wise, there was some things that I liked that they did. There was others that were a little too on the nose. I thought that it was really cool in episode 1 where Dexter went down to meet Camilla, the woman who always gave him the cold case files, and you just see a key lime pie in the background. And it's like, oh, cool. Dexter fans are going to recognize that, and you're not really drawing our attention to it. That's good. But then they mention the fucking pie like 6 other times. Her boat is called Slice of Pie, which is, I guess, the canonical reason that they're giving for Dexter calling his boat Slice of Life. And it's like, too on the nose. Too on the nose. And even the one that we get later on in the season with LaGuerta, where Harry picks her up and she's walking out of a guy's house and kisses him and he, you know, disappears into the shadow. Like, who is that? Oh, that's Miguel Prado. He's wild. He thinks he's going to be DA one day. Having Miguel show up, cool. I think he should have had a couple of lines or something like that. And then don't even really draw our attention to who it is. We'll figure it the fuck out pretty easily if he's a Hispanic character that looks anything close to Jimmy Smits. But the fact that she had to tell the audience and add in the whole DA thing, it was just too on the nose. Again, have some confidence in your viewers. Dexter fans are fucking rabid. We will pick this shit out. We will sniff it out like a bloodhound. You don't have to shove our nose in it. So Easter egg wise, that's another thing that's just, I'm more strict on with prequels than most people. I think they can get very annoying when they're very on the nose and they're unnecessary. And, you know, they're half and half this season. I wish they were a little more subtle. I wish they were a little more of an Easter egg hunt versus them just like pointing right at it and saying, remember this character? Yeah, motherfucker, we remember. Whole season spent on him. We've watched it multiple times. We remember. The New Blood cold open. That's something else I haven't brought up yet. So the whole bookending story device of this is that, you know, right off the end of New Blood, Dexter's being driven away, presumably by Angela, after he was left out in the cold, bleeding out from the gunshot wound. They get him to the hospital, and while he's there being resuscitated, his life is flashing before his eyes. I thought it was interesting that they did not go back to that to end the season. To me, that tells me that they have pretty much gotten the go-ahead that they're going to have more seasons, and so whenever we get to the end of this, I think they'll have something like that. What do I think about that explanation? I mean, I'm assuming they're going to give us a little more context in Resurrection. As is, fine, whatever. He got shot in the chest, and I guess it missed his heart, and it was cold, so his blood slowed, and they're going to save him. They're really written into a corner there, though, so I hope they pay it off well in Resurrection and don't give him like a fucking get-out-of-jail-free card, literally, where Angela's the one that brings him to the hospital. Batista's on the way. He's fucking incapacitated. He ain't getting out of that hospital bed anytime soon. If they just start the season and he, you know, pulls out the fucking IV and limps out of the hospital and now he's on the run, like, fuck that. So I can't really say much until we get to Resurrection, but as an opening scene, giving you some kind of indication of where Resurrection's going to kick off from, okay, fine. And the last thing that I'll talk about is that something I'm actually very happy about. For as much as I've bitched about retconning and continuity errors, one that I am totally okay with is that they completely fucking ignore the character of Dr. Vogel, and God bless you for doing so. Because, you know, I mean, I've found people that think that season 8's not as bad as people say it is, but I find very few people even in that group that will not say that season 8 is the worst season of the show. You know, and so Dr. Vogel is one of those characters that I think the actress does fine. I don't dislike her character, just her presence, but it's one of those jumping the shark moments. Somebody else came up with the code. Fuck that. It's Harry's code. I don't need this extra bullshit. It makes perfect sense that a detective, lifelong detective, could come up with these ideas himself. He doesn't need a psychology expert and a psychiatrist to do it. So never really liked her character as an explanation for Harry's code, and I'm glad, even though she should have been there, because the flashback sequences that we see on those little DVDs in Season 8 are during Dexter's first couple of kills when he's working on Miami Metro. I'm glad they did not bring her in. And Clyde Phillips' explanation, for as much as that guy frustrates me, I was totally cool with that. He's like, yeah, it never entered our minds. Good. It shouldn't. So overall, I think I pretty much covered everything that I wanted to say here about the show. A lot of thoughts. You know, even for a third time talking about it, I could still talk about it for another probably 30 minutes or so. But overall, I liked the show. I do have a lot of issues. You know, most of the review probably sounded more negative in the spoiler section, but that's because, as I said in the beginning, I do think the writing of this show is just mid-tier. I think there's a lot of issues here. I think that there's much better that we've seen out of this show and much better that we can hope for out of this show. But the charm and the energy and the vibe of classic Dexter really makes a lot of that easier to go down, especially after the experience we've had with Season 8 and New Blood. You know, you take our experience of those last 2 seasons out of it, I think a lot of us would be a lot more harsh on this season. But in retrospect, it's like, oh, thank God, it's watchable again. So, yeah, I like it. I dig it. I really think that they can do better with the second season, and I have faith that they're going to. But overall, I'm happy with it. I'm on board for Season 2. Bring it on. So as I said in the beginning of the video, you can look forward to me covering Dexter Resurrection most likely after the season is wrapped. I don't really like doing episode-by-episode reviews anymore, but if the show is just fucking bananas, maybe I'll be inclined to do something. Most likely, though, you'll hear me talk about it after it's wrapped up. And I will be doing some renewed rankings, maybe even doing some different rankings that I did the last go-around. And something else you can look forward to is sometime between now and when Dexter Resurrection airs, I'm going to have a live stream with me, my buddy Charles, who's also a massive Dexter fan, and hopefully my buddy Uncle Sean. And we'll dive into this entire show. We'll talk about every single season, our thoughts, things we like, things we dislike, you know, give some speculation for Dexter Resurrection, what we want to see, what we don't want to see. So that should be a really fun live stream that I do not have any idea when it will happen, but between now and when that show airs, it will happen. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss that shit. And that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my Dexter season reviews. And I'm also going to put a ranking up here where I ranked all of Dexter's antagonists. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.